Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to take you through the process of putting my Ensete ventricosums to bed for the winter. So this is probably my largest one that I have at the moment. It's around about 2.5 meters in height, or at least it was until the top leaves up there started to flop down. They were a tiny bit higher. What happened is we had a hard frost last night. It took me a little bit by surprise. It was forecast to be 2 degrees, but I know from experience it's always a few degrees colder where I live than the forecast. So I was expecting -1. But it was actually -4 that we had, and this is the first frost this has faced all autumn. We've had a really mild autumn. It's now middle of November and it was still growing until yesterday, so it's quite surprising how long it's lasted. We can easily have a killing frost in September here in North Scotland, but it was just very late this year, an exceptionally mild autumn. But as you can see, -4 last night. It's completely destroyed the leaves. The trunk will be fine though. The trunk is really thick and it has a kind of lattice, almost like honeycomb structure. I'll see if I can find a piece to show you. So this here is a section of the stem, and it's built up as a series of compartments. So you can see, hopefully if the camera focuses on that there, there's a series of compartments or section there. So it's kind of full of water. So as it freezes from the outside, the water will have to freeze before it can get to the inside of the plant. And if I scrape off the top layer, or the bottom layer in this case, you can see even better there. You got all these little sections. They're all absolutely saturated full of water, and when water freezes it requires a huge amount of temperature difference, so there's a lot of energy needed to be pulled out of this to turn the water into ice. So as the plant starts to freeze, the outer layers will freeze and they'll sacrifice themselves, but the inner layer of the plant will be above freezing, will be absolutely fine. So that's why with these Ensetes, the first freeze is not normally a problem. As long as it's not prolonged cold for maybe 1 or 2 days below freezing, it should be fine, and it will just sacrifice the outer layers of the stem because that water layer acts as a kind of thermal storage, and it keeps the heat and doesn't let the center freeze. But if it's consistently cold on and off for months, then it will die from rot from being too damp. But a quick sharp frost like this will kill the leaves, kill the outer layer of the stem. But as I say, you've got all these compartments inside, and so the actual inner section of the plant will be absolutely fine because you've got all these areas full of water. So what I'm going to do to store this is what I did last year, and it's probably one of the best ways of storing an Ensete. Unless you've got somewhere warm and sunny and you've got good light levels in your winter, then this is the best way of storing it. If you do have it somewhere sunny and it's the reasonable temperature, you can keep them in a conservatory or something. But what most people do, especially if they're as far north as I am, where it's quite cold and dark in the winter, is you cut all the leaves off, you cut all the roots off, you're then left with the stem and a bit of a corm at the base. That's where nearly all the energy from the plant is stored, in a carbohydrate substance. And so although you lose a lot of the leaves, you won't actually lose a huge amount of size next spring, and they'll be back to this size probably in about 2 months next summer. So they do dry store really well. And what you do is you keep them completely dry, keep them somewhere cool so they don't start to grow, but you need to keep them above freezing, ideally above 5 degrees so they don't start to rot. Keep them somewhere dry, and then when spring comes and it's warm enough, you plant them back in the soil and they take off again. And I can show you some photos of what this looked like last spring and how much it's grown over the year, and it's been quite exceptional growth. So just go ahead now, start cutting this off. I'll be using a knife. I find that the stems are too wide for secateurs, and also because it's just really soft material, it's not woody in any way, the knife cuts through it really easily. So that's the leaves now stripped off my Ensete, and now what I need to do is dig it out of the ground. I've got a layer of mulch here, of bark, so I'll be scraping that back and then be cutting around it, cutting all the roots off. I'll just leave the roots in the ground, they won't re-sprout or anything. It needs to grow from the central base of the trunk. So I'll take off the roots as they're not required for storage, and I'll actually show you a close-up now of what the inside of the trunk looks like, because it does store a huge amount of water. So as well as the inside of the stem storing a huge amount of water, the leaves themselves do. So you can see here, it's a bit like a bromeliad. You've got all these pools of water in there, so there's a huge amount of water stored in the trunk itself, and if that was to be left, it would start rotting. So what I'll be doing is, once I dig this out of the ground, I'll be tipping it upside down, leaving it upside down all day, and then before we get another hard frost tonight, I'll take it into a frost-free location. And it's quite a good idea to leave quite a lot of these leaves, even though these will actually die off over the winter time and dry up. These will be sacrificial, so as the plant starts to lose moisture, it will sacrifice its older leaves to maintain the moisture in the middle of the plant. And also in the base of these leaves, it can actually store carbohydrates. So there is energy in the leaf stalks themselves, not just in the corm, although the corm stores the most of the energy. There is actually some energy stored in the old leaf bases, so it's good to leave them if you can, even if it looks a little bit messy, because they will actually, as I say, be sacrificial when it dries out, but also they store a little bit of energy, so you'll just get a bigger plant for next year. So I'll go ahead now, I'll start digging this out. I'll also need to take off quite a lot of the soil. If you have too much soil sitting on it and the soil stays wet all winter, what will happen is it will start to rot off. And this is going to be extremely heavy. You can actually see where I've cut the stems. Lots of sap starting to pour out of there now as it's just been cut. So there'll be a lot of sap coming out as well. That's another reason it needs to be put upside down. It needs to really dry out a bit so it doesn't start to rot. And when it comes to the weight of this thing, this is much heavier than what it looks. Although this is only about 1 meter in height, that stem is completely full of water, so you can imagine that's probably 50 litres of water or something, so 50 kilograms, possibly more. It depends how much of the corm on this plant is underground, but it's going to be extremely heavy, so you do have to watch that you don't do your backing when you're digging up Ensetes, because although they don't look particularly heavy, they're actually really heavy. It's almost like lifting a barrel of water because of the amount of water inside them. So this is my other Ensete ventricosum. This is my back garden, and this is part of my tropical bed. You can see some of the other bananas just in the background up there. So what I'll be doing with this one is I'll be doing the same again. I'll be cutting off all the leaves, digging it up, and then dry storing it. So I was editing, I just realised I haven't actually filmed an outro. So this is the Ensete ventricosums now. That last section of the video was filmed back in November. It's now the middle of February. As you can see, they're kind of desiccated slightly. They're currently here in my conservatory. Temperatures have got down to about 5 degrees over winter. But I didn't get any frost, luckily, and we've had temperatures up to about 13, 14 degrees. So in my next update video, I'll see you guys in probably a month or two's time when I start to get these ready for spring. Around about March time is when I start to get these ready, because I can't really put them out in my garden until about June. Any earlier than that, there's a risk of hard frost, and also we get some very strong winds in April time and May time, and that can easily damage the plants as well. So although they're looking quite dead at the moment, these should really perk up come springtime, and I'll give you guys an update then.